Hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Ted Myers is an American singer, songwriter, guitarist, and author who began his musical journey in a trio of bands in the late 60s. A founding member of Boston-based band The Lost, Ted would provide guitar and vocals from 1965 to 1967. During that time, the group issued a few singles, but no album. With a renewed interest years later, a couple of compilation CDs would appear. Ted then formed Chamaeleon Church with future SNL member and actor Chevy Chase. Yes, that Chevy Chase. The band would release one self-titled album in 1968. Then Mr. Myers was to join the band Ultimate Spinach and would write and sing on the band's third album, sometimes referred to as Ultimate Spinach III, released in 1969. Later, there were stints in the bands Glider and Incognito. And then came Ted's solo album, Lifeafterlife, in 2012, which was 6 years in the making. My guest would continue to write songs and try his hand at writing, penning 3 books and several short stories. Well, welcome, Ted.
Thank you.
So go ahead.
Actually, it was 4 books, but that's all
4
right.
books. Okay. All right. That's all right. I appreciate any corrections because I want this to be, on the up and up.
I have an Amazon author page if anybody wants to go look for it.
Okay. All right. And it's just under Ted Myers?
Yeah, Ted Myers author, Amazon, Google Ted Myers Amazon author page, probably have come up.
Okay, and it'll be there. Well, take us back to the beginning. Where were you born?
In New York City, the Bronx to be exact.
Okay.
But I was raised in Manhattan.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I just recently talked to Pepe Castro. You know who he is. Yeah, okay. I'm sure everybody
Yeah, the
knows
Blues
Pepe.
Blues. Well, we used to
Yes.
play in the Village a lot too. The Lost used to play in the Village, and they played at a place, I think called the Bazaar, right down the street from where we were playing at the Night Owl a lot.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Ever hear of that?
Yes, Pepe, and then oh gosh, a while back, maybe last year, the Alessi brothers. I talked to them too.
Yeah.
And the twins, and they gave me some very humorous stories about
I
being
remember
twins.
them, yeah.
Well, you have any fond childhood memories growing up there?
From New York?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, also, one of my books is
there you go. Hold it up a little bit higher. Hold it up a little bit higher so we can. There we go. Making it music, sex, and drugs, and the golden age of rock. Yes.
Yeah, and if you read this, we don't even need this interview, but
it's all in there.
I name drop all over the place in this book because I think the point of interest about it is that I met all these people that later became very, very famous, and I was the one that didn't. But
okay. I see that Graham Nash, the comment up there with Graham Nash. Yeah.
He was very sweet, very, very nice man. I knew Graham when he was with Joni Mitchell, and I knew them when I first came to California. When I first came to Southern California in 1969. But jumping back to New York City, I went to elementary school at a public elementary school, as most people did in those days when, there was a sort of a median income for everybody. And one of my classmates, I was in love with this when I was 10 years old in the 5th grade. I was desperately in love with this girl, Janie Schindelheim.
Oh, okay.
And I went through all of elementary school, all of junior high school, and all of high school with her. And she never knew I was in love with her. But But when we grew up, she married Jan Wenner and started Rolling Stone magazine.
Oh, really? That's oh wow, is that right?
Bizarre.
So you never told her how you felt? Never,
No, I never had the nerve.
never had the
I
nerve.
thought she was out of my league.
Well, how about early on? You remember hearing music in the household?
My parents were big on musical comedy, you know.
Yeah,
So Rodgers and Hammerstein were one of my first big influences, and in a sense, they did influence my melodic sense.
yeah.
I thought that the most memorable thing about those songs were the melodies,
The melodies. You're right. You're right.
and
They all have.
so I became a very melodic songwriter
Yeah,
when I
that,
started writing songs.
yeah. You're my favorite type of songwriter. It's got
Oh,
to have a
thank you.
melody. It's got to have a melody. Yeah, that's what grabs me. The melodies first.
Yeah, yeah, and the Beatles, of course, encouraged me in that respect as well.
Right.
And one other story from junior high school.
Sure.
One of my classmates was a blind Puerto Rican kid named Jose Feliciano.
Ah, yes, yes.
And he played guitar like a bat out of hell. But I was just starting out at the time. I was just beginning, but we actually got to jam together a little bit.
Yes, yes, that was a question a little bit later, but that's fine that you talk about it now. Whenever that comes up, whenever it comes to your mind. Well, what was the first musical instrument you learned to play?
Actually, a recorder.
Oh, okay, okay, all right.
When I was 7 or 8 years old, I don't know that my mother took me to a little music school way down on the Lower East Side where everybody
Uh-huh.
had these recorders,
Yeah,
and so I learned very simple little melodies on the recorder. But when I hit my teens, and I think it was 13, I started pestering my parents for a guitar. I
okay.
really wanted a guitar.
Uh-huh.
This was before the Beatles, incidentally. This was
Okay.
1958,
Oh, okay. Wow.
if you can
Wow.
even conceive of that. And so I got a nylon string acoustic guitar,
Oh, okay.
which was probably not the right kind to get, but I didn't know. And
So they buckled under the pressure, huh? They buckled
yeah,
under.
I taught myself all the hit songs on the radio.
Uh-huh.
And I'm musically illiterate. I can't actually read written music, or write it, but I have this phenomenal ear. So everything I could hear, everything I heard, I could duplicate.
Right.
Um, which is how I screwed myself out of a music education, because I faked reading music because
Uh-huh.
they would play me the melody and then I'd play it right back to them as if I was reading.
Pull the wool over their eyes.
My own
That's
eyes,
interesting.
really.
Your own eyes, yeah. Well, what about some other bands, musicians that you started getting into, let's say as a teen?
Um, let's see. I loved um, If I Don't Have You, Since I Don't Have You by the Skyliners, was it?
Oh, I
I think
believe so. I believe that's
I
right.
think
I
the
believe that.
Skyliners is right.
Yeah.
I love that song because it was melodic and had this unexpected chord change.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
almost all the other doo-wop songs had the same, one relative minor 4/5.
Right.
And this one, it started out that way, but then it threw a curve. It had just a different change that really struck me emotionally, and
Right.
that's something that I learned very early on about writing music, writing songs. If you have that unexpected chord change, it's hooky.
Right. Right. And
So
it Yeah, it keeps people, it challenges the listener too, I think, you know.
Of
I
course,
think it's a good thing.
I liked all the other popular artists at the time. I
Yeah,
liked Elvis
yeah,
up until he went into the army, I think. And
yeah.
then I really loved other doo-wop groups like
Yeah.
the um, oh God, names go right out of my head these days. Um, well, there was the Coasters, and there was who were the guys that did and there was a girl in the group too. Ah,
The
the
platters.
Platters, thank
Yeah.
you. And
Handy that I have another little phone here.
similarly, the Flamingos
Yes.
also did a cover of um,
Yeah,
uh, that great old song, but they did it better than anybody else. It
yeah.
was Chew Up, Chew Up.
Yes, yes, yes.
What's
And
that
you know
one?
what, that reminds me of when I heard first time I heard Art Garfunkel, I Only Have Eyes for You. You know, I thought it was an
That's the
original.
one.
Okay. I
That's the
thought,
song.
oh, that's the song. I thought it was an original. And then you find out later, no, he wasn't the first one to do it.
The
But
Flamingos did it in the
that
50s,
that's okay.
and
Yeah,
they didn't write it either.
right.
It was
No.
written in the 20s or 30s.
Right, right. Yeah.
It
It's
was
it's
an old standard even then.
right. It's fascinating to find out the origins, you know, when you do and you think, wow, that just wipes out my whole theory right there, you know. Well, can you remember you know, talking about doo-wop groups, were there up there there were those street corner doo-woppers, right? Street corner singers?
Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
subway station singers,
Subway and down in the subways too.
because
Yeah.
they got the echo with that.
That echo effect, right, right. I wonder if any producers had heard that and said, okay, let's try that in a studio. You know, let's try to get that effect in a studio. That's
Well,
interesting.
well, they did. They had a
Yeah,
sort of echo. They had reverb, which was
you're right,
the first
right.
kind of echo. It was a
Yeah,
spring reverb, I think. Or
yeah.
no, there was another kind that I remember hearing about that they had at Columbia Records, which was in an old church, and they
Uh,
put a microphone at one end of a long staircase and a
uh-huh.
speaker at the other.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's how they got the echo.
Oh, you know, and a lot of that was trial and error too. You know, you just kind of like, well, let's see if this works, and if it
Yeah,
doesn't, we'll try something else. Yeah,
yeah.
Phil Spector, I bet he was all over that. You know, learning
Oh man,
doing
Phil,
that, doing that.
I know a guy that engineered for Phil Spector, and
Uh-huh.
he
Uh-huh.
had some stories.
Oh yes. Oh
He
yes.
kept a big gun on the a big pistol on the console at all times, and every
Yeah.
once in a while he'd shoot it at the ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. You
It
know,
was always crazy.
crazy. You know who his guy, I mean, the similar type across the pond was Joe Meek. You know who Joe Meek was?
I know who he was.
Yeah.
Didn't know much about him. I didn't know he was
Yeah,
that
he
nuts.
was crazy. He was mad as a hatter too. Yeah, he was
Really?
like, maybe that's what it took to be a good producer. You know,
Well, it there's film directors that are like that. There's a lot of people where, there's a fine line between a brute genius and insanity.
insanity, right? Well, can you remember one of the first concerts that you attended or you went to?
Yes, I certainly can. Um, when I was about 11 or 12, my best friend Barry and I used to get on the subway and go to Brooklyn and hear and get into the Alan Freed
Alan Freed.
rock and
Wow.
roll shows at the Brooklyn Paramount.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
I was to at least two of those. And I
Yeah.
got to see Chuck Berry, Little Richard, um, the white version of Little Richard. Anyway, what was his name? That piano player guy. Come on,
Oh, Jerry Lee.
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. You're my onboard memory. When you get to my age, you lose it, man. I'm telling you.
That's all right. I'm already getting that where I walk into a room and I say, well, why did I walk into this room? You know,
I
I'm
get
starting
that all the time.
So anyway, well, talk about the Greenwich Village scene. You were
Right.
up there, yeah, part of that.
When I
And
By the
James
time I was
Taylor.
12, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, okay, no, I started playing guitar at 13. So
Mhm.
by the time I was like 14, I would carry my guitar slung over my shoulder in a canvas case, and I'd walk down to Greenwich Village. It wasn't a very long walk from where I lived. And I used to join the Sunday afternoon hootenannies,
Uh-huh.
which was a big thing in New
Yeah.
York. And it would draw hundreds, if not thousands, of people around the fountain in Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
And I met a lot of other, folk music players of that time. And that's where I learned all the folk songs, all the popular folk songs at the time. But at this point, we were in the folk era. It was the early 60s, starting maybe in 1960.
Yeah. Do you remember do you know of Carolyn Hester?
Of
Do you know that
course,
name?
I know
Okay.
Carolyn Hester.
Okay, you know her.
I
I had an interview.
have pictures with Carolyn Hester.
Okay. I had an interview. You'll be interested if you haven't seen it to go back after this. I'll send you the link or I'll
Okay,
tell you
cool.
what date it was. But she's a Texan, living back here now, still performing with her daughters, in a trio, 87 years old and sharp as a tack.
Yeah, she was
She's
a real
still got
beauty too
right.
in her day.
Right. But the story she told, I was real quick. I don't want to dominate this, but she gave Bob Dylan really his first break. Well,
I
do you
know.
know the story? You know the story.
Sure.
Okay.
He played
Okay.
harmonica
Right. There you go. There
in
you
her
go.
band.
Right, right.
Um,
So that was a nice story to hear.
and uh, when I much later, when I was working for Rhino Records after my actual performing career, and after I finally resigned myself to the fact that I wasn't going to be a rock star, I got a job at Rhino Records, and I was lucky enough to join the A&R department there. And one of the things that I came up with was the folk music genre. They hadn't even delved into it at all. So I was the folk guy at
Yeah.
Rhino. And somebody saw, I did a box set of
Yeah.
folk music, and somebody
Yeah.
saw it, and a concert promoter saw it and called up and said, "What would you guys be interested in co-sponsoring a folk music festival?"
Uh-huh.
This was in 1993.
Uh-huh.
So Carolyn was part of that. She was in
Re-
it. We couldn't get Bob Dylan, obviously. Pete
Right.
Seeger, he was very old at the time and sort of had another idea about how the festival should be. So he didn't come, but we got Arlo Guthrie, and we got all the big folk artists at that time. Richie Havens,
What about Phil Oaks?
Phil
Oh God.
Oakes. Phil Oakes
Phil Oaks. I
was
pronounced
no
that wrong. How
Phil
about
Oakes
Fred?
was no longer alive at that time.
Oh, at that point he was already gone. What about Fred Neil?
Fred Neil was no longer alive at that
Oh,
time
both
either.
of those. Okay. I'm over two
Well,
there.
actually, Fred Neil was missing. He
Okay.
was in Florida somewhere.
Okay.
I did
Missing in
try to
action.
get him. I tried to find him, but we couldn't
Uh-huh.
find him.
Okay. I think he was being attacked by alligators or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
I loved Fred Neil.
yeah.
Dolphins, who's being attacked by dolphins.
Okay, Dolphins. That's a good one. Yeah, I do too. So many people don't realize. He was the author of. Now I'm forgetting the song. The one that
Everybody's
Harry
talking.
Nilsson. Harry Nilsson made big. They think
Everybody's talking.
right.
Everybody's
Everybody's
talking.
talking. Yeah, they think that Harry Nilsson originated it.
He
Uh,
he he sold that song several times.
Did he? Did he? Okay. But he
Yes,
finally found.
he would, Fred Neil had a drug problem. I guess it's
Yes.
common knowledge, but
Yeah.
he went from publisher to publisher and made the same deal over and over again and
Oh,
got money from
did he
all
really?
these different publishers
Did he really?
for the same song.
And they weren't wise to him. They didn't catch on to
Well,
that.
they got wise to him,
Well, they
obviously.
finally did. Well, we'll talk about the same time hiring James Taylor. Talk about that.
I was 18 years old. I was in college, and I came up with the idea. Me and my best friend Steve came up with the idea of the college was in Vermont. It was Goddard College in Plainfield, Vermont. That's also where the Lost started. But before the Lost, I gathered together a small cadre of co-students, and we went to Martha's Vineyard Island and started a coffee house.
Okay.
And we didn't know it was impossible, so we did it.
You did.
It was
Right.
one of those things where we just managed to do it. And
Right.
I don't know how, but one of the first, and I was in charge of getting the entertainment, of course, and if I couldn't find anybody else, it was me. So one day, this tall, lanky kid comes off the ferry. We were right on the street in Vineyard Haven where the ferry landed, and he was carrying a guitar, and he looked kind of cool. So I said, "Hey, kid, come here." And it was like, ever play a gig?
Uh-huh.
And he was 16 at the time, and he was, "Oh, what?" Anyway, long story short, he came in, played a few songs for us. Nothing original, but I remember he played "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right" by Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And we hired him on the spot. And he would play it in our coffee house at least once a week.
Did he? Yeah.
Often with his friend and sidekick, Danny Korchmar.
Yes, Danny. Yes.
Who ultimately ended up playing guitar who ended up marrying Carole King, actually.
So were his pipes already pretty mature? His
James?
voice? Yeah, at that point.
Yeah, we called him Jamie. Yeah. Yeah, he was a good singer, He was I felt he was kind of bland. He was, his delivery was pretty flat.
Right.
And but it caught on. So I mean, everybody liked him.
Yeah. I find it fascinating how he signed with Apple. He recorded with Apple, the Beatles, Apple Music.
He went to England at a very early age. He wasn't having very much luck getting signed here in the US. But when the Beatles heard him, particularly Paul McCartney, they signed him to Apple, and they got Peter Asher to produce him.
Yeah.
And Peter Asher continued to be his producer when he signed with Warner Brothers in the US.
Yeah.
And moved to California.
Right.
And moved in with Joni Mitchell. Which is the first time I had seen him in 4 years, when I went to Joni Mitchell's house in Laurel Canyon, we became friends. Anyway.
Yeah.
Like I say.
We'll get up to that point, but I want to ask you about the Lost. How did the band come together?
So after I got back from Martha's Vineyard, after the coffee house experience, and I got a lot of performing hours logged because I was the entertainment most of the time. And at that time, the Beatles had just started. It had just struck. It was 1964.
Yeah.
And so everybody was plugging in,
Yes.
All the folkies were plugging in. And I wanted to start an electric band. And so I found four other like-minded individuals at Goddard College. Willie Alexander, who went on to become something of a legend
Yes.
in Boston and still performs at 83 or whatever.
Wow. Wow.
And there was Hugh Magby, who was a black guy, so we were the first integrated rock and roll band.
Yeah.
And then there was Walter Powers on bass, who later became part of the Velvet Underground, and a guy named Tony Pfeiffer on drums.
Well, I wanted to ask you about how was the band signed to Capitol Records? The Lost.
Wow, I mean, dumb luck, I guess. One of the first things that, well, first of all, we played at Goddard for the student body, at regular intervals, and we rehearsed a lot in the office of the music teacher, the director of the music department. There was one music guy, and then we actually landed a gig in the capital of Vermont. No, not Montpelier. We were near Montpelier, but it was a bigger city than that, I think. Anyway, it was where the university was, where University of Vermont was, the state university, and we got a job at a club called the Cave.
Okay.
Because the Beatles played at the Cavern Club, and we figured it's serendipity, They played at the Cavern Club. We're playing at the Cave. So we played at the Cave on weekends for several months, I guess, until the end of the semester at Goddard. And at Goddard, we had this thing called a work semester, because in Vermont, it got so cold and snowy at the end of December. It was like, if once you left for Christmas holidays, you stayed gone for 3 months.
You were gone.
You don't come back. You don't come back till March.
Till March. Was it Burlington? Was it Burlington?
Burlington, yeah, it was Burlington.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Good Lord. So we played. So when work semester came around, we decided that our work project would be to be a rock and roll band playing in Boston.
Yeah.
So we all decamped to Boston with our instruments and started shopping around for possible gigs, going into clubs, trying to get auditions. And then we actually got some sort of an agent guy who got us a gig at our first gig in Boston was a U.S. Navy dance.
Right, is that right?
Down near the waterfront there somewhere. And it was funny because they kept going, "Where are your uniforms?" Because we dressed all different, like the Rolling Stones did. We didn't have uniforms, but they did.
They did. That's funny.
The audience had uniforms, the band did not. So from there, it was straight up. We kept getting more gigs, and we met a band that was well established in Boston called Barry and the Remains.
Okay, right. Yes.
I'm sure you've heard of.
Yes,
yes. The Remains, especially Barry, were very kind to us and very generous with their knowledge and connections in town. And we wound up being managed out of the same office as they were, not by the same guy, but by the partner of the guy that managed them. So he started getting us gigs all over the state and eventually in upstate New York, which was on a straight line west of Boston, where we would play in Syracuse, Albany, Schenectady, and finally Buffalo.
Okay.
And
Well,
Buffalo was as far west as we got.
Well, decades later, you would have that reunion concert with Barry and the Remains. The Remains.
That's right. We
Yeah.
we remained friends over the years. When Barry and his wife, okay, don't press me for the name. Barry and his wife formed a duo that was like kind of folky bluegrass, and they were signed to Rounder Records. They had moved to Nashville at this point.
Okay.
And so in the 90s, when I was working for Rhino, they came to LA to be on this program on FM radio called the Folk Scene. It was called Folk Scene.
Okay.
It was Roz and Howard Larman, a married couple who were the hosts. And so they needed a place to stay, so they crashed at my place, And I got to go to the studio with them and watch them perform on radio.
On radio. Okay.
I was watching radio.
Watching radio. Well, what was back to Boston? What was the Boston Tea Party in the 60s? Not from 1776, not that far back.
We were the very first act to play at the Boston Tea Party. We were the headliners, and an old friend of mine from high school, Peter Wolf, had started a band called the Hallucinations. And I fixed it so that his band could be the opening act. So it was the Hallucinations opening for the Lost. The last 2 or 3 weekends in January going into February. So it was January 66 into February of 67. And that's when the Lost broke up.
Okay.
Right after that.
Right after that.
It was their first gig at Boston Tea Party and our last gig.
Yes. And of course, Peter Wolf would go on to play with Jay Giles.
Of course.
Yes.
Well, so another old pal that became a big star, There's a pattern with me.
Right. Well, they should have brought you along too, I mean, come on, Well,
they were always very kind to me. When I went and saw them at the Whiskey, Peter called me out and made me stand up and all this. Nobody can make anybody else a star.
No.
Either it happens or it doesn't.
And you're right.
And luck is 9/10 of it.
I was just going to say luck, timing, and luck. Yeah,
That's
being
right.
at the right place at the right time, and a whole lot of luck. You're right. Because you hear all those horror stories of bands, knocking on door after door after door, and just getting rejected. And then you hear about some of these, it just falls into their lap. It's just like, why? How does that happen?
Well, having good judgment,
Yeah,
in choosing who you go with, as far as not only band members but also representatives, and producers, is also really important. And that's a lesson that I failed to learn in time.
Right.
I wanted anybody to say yes,
Right. That's the thing. I talked to a guy today who's in a band. He's in Scotland and was in a band in the 80s, and they're still recording. But he went into, he learned the business side of music, and he lectures on that, now, and he helps young artists, to avoid the pitfalls, of the business side. I said, it would have been great to have that back, somebody like that, back then when you guys were coming up, to help the band members, say, watch out for this. Don't trust this guy, watch out what you're getting.
Obviously. But on the other side of that coin is we kept just getting no. And as soon as somebody said yes, we said, okay,
Right.
Hell,
Exactly.
you toss the dice, flip the coin, and so on. So yeah, so we got signed to MGM Records, not the greatest record company in the world, and we were signed through this producer. Oh, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. First, it was Capitol, right?
Okay, right.
Yeah, and we were still in Boston at this point. It was the Lost. I'll get to MGM in a little while.
Okay. Well, you moved to New York after the Lost disbanded. You moved to New York.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's where I started Chamaeleon Church. But
Okay.
but while the Lost was just getting well known in Boston, we met this guy Al Corey, who was the regional promo man for New England for Capitol Records.
Okay.
And he's the one that got assigned to Capitol.
All right.
And you know, there's nothing wrong with Capitol Records. I mean,
No.
heck, the Beatles were on Capitol
That
Records.
was
Beach Boys were on Capitol Records.
right.
In fact, we got to open for the Beach Boys on a tour.
Yeah.
But for us, somehow or other, we slipped through the cracks. We didn't have a hit record that was hit enough, you know.
It was more miss than hit.
Yeah, you know, I don't know what it was that
well, who's Alan Lorber? Tell us who Alan Lorber is.
I'm getting to him.
Okay.
So nothing happened with Capitol. They put out actually 2 singles, well, 3, if you count the one. Oh God, what a train wreck that was. They put out first they put out Maybe More Than You, which was a hit in several local areas in New England and upstate New York, and that enabled us to keep touring in that area. In those days, you know, you could be a regional local band and the audience thought you were a nationwide hit.
Yeah.
You know, it was, we didn't have the internet. It wasn't, you know, the communications weren't what they are today.
Right.
And so you could be a big star in you could have a top 10 record in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And when you got on stage there were girls screaming, you know. So
Yeah.
it was an interesting experience, shall we say.
Yeah, I always find it interesting too how regionally across the country you may have a song that's really popular down south, you know, of all places, and nowhere else, you know, or out in the West Coast, you know, and you're from New York or what have you, and it's like,
Absolutely.
you know, no rhyme or reason, you know, sometimes it's
well,
just
that was a phenomenon in the 60s.
Yeah.
Local bands, regional bands that became big stars in their territory.
Yeah.
But you know what really pissed me off was when this band, the Standells, came out with Dirty Water about the Charles River in Boston, and they were an LA band.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Like, hey, man, that's my territory.
That's right. They fooled me when I first heard them, and I know a lot of music lovers thinking they were from up there, singing about that. They must be from there, you know. Yeah, that was yeah, they weren't.
That was the irony of it all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we'll talk. Go ahead. Did you want to talk about Alan Lorber?
Oh, okay. Well, yes. Talk some trash about Alan. We moved to New York, as you put out, as you mentioned. I moved to New York with my then wife, Eve, and I decided that was where the action was, and I was going to start afresh, you know, find a new band, a new record deal, and so on. So we got this loft that was ideal for rehearsing in, and little by little, I got band members together. But I met Alan Lorber before I started the band, as I recall. This guy, Ray Perrette, who I had met when he was in college, was manager of Ultimate Spinach,
Okay.
which was doing quite well at that time. And the producer of Ultimate Spinach was Alan Lorber.
Okay.
So Ray brought me in as a songwriter, brought me to Alan Lorber and had me play him some songs. And he immediately offered me a publishing deal for a weekly stipend, which was a living at that time.
Yeah.
$75 a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a living.
Can you imagine that? Yeah. Wow.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
So I was supporting myself, writing songs. And as I would write them, I would make little demos of them and send them to Alan or bring them to Alan. And Alan said, when you put a band together, I'll take you in the studio and we'll make an album.
Yeah.
So with that bait to dangle in front of potential band members, I was able to put a band together pretty easily. The first person I met was also through Ray Perrette. He was Tony Shuren, and Tony was the road manager of Ultimate Spinach.
Oh, okay.
And when I heard his music and his voice, I realized, no, this guy should not be a road manager. When we started writing songs together and we started harmonizing, and we had a really good vocal blend. And from there, and this guy, Chevy Chase, kept following me around all over New York. Every place I met him, he would say, I'm a drummer. If you're starting a band, I want to be in the band. So I said, well, what the hell? Let's give him a try, So Chevy moved in with his drums. And last but not least, I ran into my ex-lead guitar player, Kyle Garahan, who was in the Lost with me. I ran into him in Greenwich Village, and he was doing a solo act in Greenwich Village like I was. And I said, hey, I'm starting a band. We're already starting, we already have a record offer. Do you want to be in it? So that's how I put Chamaeleon Church together. And Kyle sang as well. So Tony and Kyle and I were able to do good three-part harmonies and stuff like that.
Yes.
The album did not turn out as I originally envisioned it, because Alan Lorber had a different idea in mind. And we didn't get along. Okay, I'll just say that. Alan and I we were often at loggerheads. Okay. And the rest of the band didn't like him either. But so I said, look, we really want to be involved with the mix. When you do the mix, Alan,
yeah.
I implore you to call at least me, at least have me there. And he swore that he would. And weeks went by. We kept calling. Is it ready yet? Are you ready to mix yet? You ready to mix yet? And finally, he called and said, come over and pick up your album. It's done. And I was fuming because I wasn't consulted about the mix.
You didn't let you in on the mix. No. Wow.
So I picked up this acetate and brought it home, and I was almost literally in tears. I just thought it was terrible. I thought it was the worst thing I ever heard.
Yeah.
I thought he had ruined all my songs. Now, in retrospect, I must say that there was something about the way he did it. See, I wanted to be the Beatles. I wanted Chamaeleon Church to be Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I wanted real presence on everything, a lot of punch, a lot of presence, drums right in your face, you know. First of all, Chevy was not an in-your-face kind of drummer. So that was bad judgment on my part. We didn't have a real bass player. The bass was Kyle and Tony would switch back and forth on bass, depending on who was playing guitar. They were all multi-instrumentalists, except for me. I just played guitar and sang lead on most of the stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, many years later, in retrospect, I kind of see what Alan Lorber was trying to do with Chamaeleon Church. He made it very soft and, very blurry and dreamy. And it's true. A lot of the songs were soft and dreamy.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to mention my favorite, and this may be a lot of fans' favorite, Camellia is Changing.
That was the single.
That was a single. That is very dreamy. It is kind of a nod to like what the Association was doing, you know.
Before the Association.
Yeah, exactly. It was a little before them, what they would do. But yeah, and the other harmony groups of that period. But yeah, but it's a nice track. It's a nice song, you know. But
well, I think they're all good songs on that album. It's just that Alan cluttered it up with a lot of pseudo psychedelic effects, you know, and backwards echo, and God only knows. He just tried every trick in the book.
Didn't need to be there. Yeah. Well. I want to ask you about the cover because it's very striking. Who designed? You remember who designed the cover?
Sure, that was Alan's brother, Steve Lorber.
Okay.
And no relation to the jazz musician. I think there's a jazz musician. Oh no, that's Jeff Lorber. Anyway, I think it was Steve. Yeah, he made plaster casts of our faces. He had us lying on the floor with straws up our nose so we could breathe.
So you could breathe.
And plaster all over our face. And when they came off, he had, basically a plaster cast of our faces.
Yeah.
Which he then arranged in a certain way, put colored lights on them. And, that's how the cover was conceived and designed.
Yeah, yeah.
And we thought it was pretty cool.
It is a cool, even today, it still stands up. Well, why did the band break up?
Well, first of all, we didn't play any gig. Well, we played about 2 gigs. We didn't get any gigs in New York City. We spent almost our whole time rehearsing for the album, and we had 12 songs or whatever it was, and we wanted to perfect every song, and we got them all down, and then we got into the studio and spent a couple of weeks recording. And then we waited and waited and waited until Alan Lorber said, "Come and pick up your album, it's done." Yeah. And then we didn't know what to do about getting gigs in New York City. I didn't know anyone. And there was a problem because of all the switching instruments. We'd have Tony on keyboards for one song, Chevy on keyboards for another song, Tony on bass sometimes, Tony on guitar sometimes, Kyle on bass sometimes, Kyle on guitar sometimes. And on one song, Kyle sang lead and played keyboards, and he was great. So doing that live can be cumbersome.
Right. Exactly.
You have to move from one song to the next before you lose the audience's attention.
Right.
Anyway, my old friend and manager, Ray Perrette, called me finally and said, why don't you guys move up to Boston? I could get you gigs up here. So I was ready to move back to Boston. My wife and I had split up. I gave up the loft, moved to Boston, moved into a big house with Ray Perrette and so a number of other people. One of them was in a band called Ill Wind, the Ill Wind.
Oh, the Ill Wind. Yes, yes, I'm familiar with them. Yes,
Right.
yes.
Well, the
Yes.
Ill Wind had another big house right next to our big house, and then one of their members lived in our house. I'm trying for names, but I'm having trouble. Anyway, so this was in Wellesley, Massachusetts. It's a suburb of Boston and home of the famous Wellesley College for Girls.
Yeah.
And I even went out with a couple of them. And we lived there, and then Kyle and Chevy, I think, had a place together somewhere else. Tony and I lived in the big house with Ray Perrette, and we got a few gigs. You know, we played. I remember a couple of outdoor gigs we played, and we managed to develop something of a stage act, but it wasn't like, you know, we couldn't do what we did on the album, so we had to
Right,
kind of reconfigure the whole thing.
right.
And there was one song where we availed ourselves of Chevy's comedic talents, and we had Kyle sat on drums, Kyle played everything. Kyle played drums, Tony played bass, and I played a sort of funk style guitar. And we did a James Brown kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Chevy got up as a front man and just improvised.
Uh-huh.
And I can't repeat some of the stuff that he said, but
I wonder if
at
there's
this,
any tapes of that circulating around.
not that song, no.
Not that song.
That was strictly a live phenomenon.
Yeah, yeah.
And after that, that city in Massachusetts, wherever the hell it was, said, "You will never play here again." But we played a couple of clubs.
Yeah, you were excommunicated from
Yeah.
there.
Oh yeah. It
Well,
was real easy with Chevy to get
yeah.
excommunicated.
Oh yes, to get people riled up. Well,
Well,
then came up.
these were the town fathers, you know, they had no sense of humor.
Right, right. Well, then came Ultimate Spinach. Again, another Alan Lorber
Well,
produced
yeah.
band. Did you were you a little leery about, well, it didn't work before with Alan? Will it work
Yes.
this time? Yeah.
Well, I was extremely leery.
Yeah.
And I don't mean Timothy.
Yeah.
When Tony and I were at this point, were at sea. We were writing songs together in the big house in Wellesley with Ray Perrette, who was managing Ultimate Spinach. And Ultimate Spinach, meanwhile, was having their internal difficulties, and they kicked out their leader, songwriter, and founder, Ian Bruce Douglas, because he was so obnoxious, nobody could stand him.
Yeah.
So he left, shaking his fist at everyone. And Tony and I were asked to replace Ian as the lead singers and songwriters for Ultimate Spinach. Now, we were as different from the original Ultimate Spinach as night from day. I mean,
Yeah.
Tony and I were influenced by the melodic British school of singing and songwriting. And Ian was very influenced by the San Francisco psychedelic sound.
Right.
So the new Ultimate Spinach was you know, miles away from what the original Ultimate Spinach was. So it didn't, needless to say, we didn't sell any albums.
Right.
But we
Well,
did go on a tour. We went on one final Ultimate Spinach tour.
uh-huh.
And it was the weirdest itinerary you've ever seen. We took a station wagon, dragging our equipment in a trailer from Boston to Florida. We played in Tampa, St. Petersburg, Florida, where we were completely engulfed with groupies. It's amazing. Anyway, I won't go into detail. And, then from there, our road manager, Kelly, loaded all the equipment into a truck and drove halfway across the country to Kansas City.
Yeah, that was wild. Yeah.
And we took a train
Uh-huh.
to
Yeah.
Kansas City.
Yeah.
So
That was, yeah.
so
Why
we,
Kansas City? Yeah. I mean, usually
well,
when they do like an East Coast tour, it's, it's on the East Coast. You
those
don't
were
just
all the gigs we could get. I mean,
don't jump. Okay.
our tour consisted of 3 gigs. It was
Yeah.
like Florida, Kansas City, and Aspen, Colorado.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
in Aspen, we did a residency. It was the middle of winter, incidentally, and we did a residency at this club that was one of the major clubs in Aspen, which was a real fun town, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And we played there for approximately a week or 2, and it was great because we really perfected our stage act. Unfortunately, it was all in vain because we never played live again after that. And but that was fun. I mean, Tony and I thought of it as a bread and butter gig. It was like, hey, we got to make a living. And if we can make a living playing music, let's do it. Why not?
Right. Right. Well, talk about, was this the same tour where the band was busted for marijuana? Was that the same, or was that a different tour?
That wasn't on a tour. No.
Oh,
That was
okay.
after we got back from that tour
Oh, okay. Okay.
in Boston. A significant number of the band members were hanging out at some pad or other on Beacon Street, and or in that area, and they got busted for marijuana.
Yeah.
And
But you weren't there. You weren't there.
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Tony wasn't there. It was everybody else.
Everybody.
And so they weren't busted for possession of, they were busted for being in the presence, being present where it was being smoked. That was an actual charge.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Anyway, it was it was a tempest in the teapot. There was really no big deal. The whole thing evaporated pretty quickly. But before it did, I left Boston. I said, I think I've always wanted to go to the West Coast. I said, now's the time for me to go.
Yes.
So while the band was pending trial, I hopped on a plane with my acoustic guitar and very little else and went to Boston. And first I stayed with a friend, a girlfriend I knew who was living in Berkeley. And soon after that, I moved into the Berkeley Inn, which was really in the epicenter of Berkeley. It was at the corner of Telegraph and Haste in Berkeley.
Okay.
And the first thing that happened when I moved in to this hotel was the famous Berkeley riots.
Yes.
1969. And like they were happening.
You saw that
outside my window.
Yeah, right outside. You saw it. Wow.
I mean, I could smell the tear gas.
Yeah.
I mean, and there were cops tear gassing kids and beating kids, and there were film crews from the news channels in my room filming it out the window.
Out the window. God. Wow, you're right there. Yeah, I mean, it's like that's surreal. That's a surreal experience. Yeah. Yeah.
I always liken my memoir to a Zelig, that movie
Yeah.
Zelig with Woody
Yeah.
Allen. Somehow
Oh, that's a
nobody
great.
knows who he is, but he's always right there.
Right. That's a great movie too.
So
Well, you turned California turned out to be a permanent move for you too. You know.
indeed, once I got a taste of California, I had no desire to go back to the East Coast. I did not miss the snow. I did not miss the cold. And I did like the girls in California. There were
Right,
a
right.
lot of
We'll,
pretty girls.
we'll talk
And
about the. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go
Finish.
ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, talk about the move to LA and a house in Laurel Canyon. Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't long after moving to Berkeley that I started teaming up with another collaborator, a guy that just did lyrics, this guy, Ron, who lived in the Berkeley Inn with a lot of other oddball characters. And we started I made, I made little demo tapes of our songs on a Wallensack tape recorder. And I started going around to there were very few music companies in San Francisco and Berkeley. It was very limited where I could go, and there was Bill Graham's company, and they said no, and there was the company that bought that Concord bought years later, Fantasy.
Oh, okay. Okay,
I
fantasy.
was working for Concord, and they bought Fantasy, but at the time, a guy named Saul Zantz was running Fantasy, and he had an A&R guy, and this A&R guy, I felt he was very arrogant. He kept saying, that's the wrong chord there. I mean, he would get so deep into criticizing my songs, it became irritating.
Yeah.
He was like
Yeah.
telling me how to write songs. You are telling me how to write songs.
No.
How many
that's
songs have you written, man?
Right.
So after I played a couple of live gigs in Berkeley and San Francisco. Oh, I left out the part where I moved back in with my ex-wife. She was living in San Francisco at the time, and boy, it's such a beautiful city. And we got back together for about 3 months. That was usually our shelf life. We would get back together. We would get together for like 3 months, get on each other's nerves, and split up. So I moved back in with her for a while, and Ron and Eve, my wife, and I would pal around together somewhat. We went and saw the Who at Bill Graham's club, the big one on Market Street. What the heck was it? Never mind. And eventually Ron and I decided we can't get a record deal here.
Was it the Civic Auditorium?
No, it was
Bill Graham's
Winterland.
Oh, okay, okay.
It was
okay.
Winterland.
Okay.
And I didn't play there. I just got to see the Who there.
Okay.
And I had seen the Who before. I saw the Who on one of their very first gigs in America. And I also saw the Beatles live. Not too many people can say that these days.
No.
Who are still alive.
Still around to talk about it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and I saw Jimi Hendrix at a small club in Greenwich Village called Salvation in 1967, shortly before I left for California.
Yeah.
And that literally blew my mind.
Oh, that would. And to see him at that point. Wow.
I've never seen anybody do things with a guitar that guy did. And I saw him several times subsequent to that. But getting back to the West Coast, Ron and I decided we need to buy a car and drive down to LA and move there, or at least do a scouting. We did a scouting mission first, and Ron put up the money for the car. And once again, with my impeccable judgment, I bought a beautiful cherry 1959 Morris Minor, which was an English car, as you may know. And what I didn't know was it leaked oil as fast as you could put it in.
Oh man. Oh my God.
But I didn't know anything about cars. So I didn't know it was leaking oil. I was just driving it.
Yeah.
So anyway, eventually we drove it on the freeway a little bit too long, and the whole engine just self-destructed.
Oh.
So then there followed a whole series of junk cars, that we could afford. What could we afford? $500, And so we started shopping our songs around in LA, and I went to a whole bunch of publishers, and finally I got a staff songwriting deal with a publisher that was really out of Nashville called Tree Music.
Tree Music, yes.
And so they signed me to, I was like the first staff writer in the LA office of Tree Music. And that enabled me to get a band together and rehearse right there in their offices, where they're in the building where their offices were. And
was that the section?
Somewhat, yeah. It was they were like the best players in LA, just about. I mean, the guys that I got, I really lucked out. The bass player was Jack Conrad. He wasn't part of the section, but he was a phenomenal bass player and has a whole string of hit records to his credit. The keyboard player was Craig Durgee. He was in the section. The drummer was Don Murray, who was in the Turtles.
Yes.
Before, who was the first drummer of the Turtles. And let's see. Oh, the lead guitar player was the best guitar player I've ever heard. Well, Hendrix, but then Ted Green. This guy, Ted Green, could play any style of music and at blinding speeds, if you wanted him to. And I was lucky enough to get him on lead guitar just before he quit playing rock and roll.
Oh.
After that, he just became a guitar teacher, and he played classical music on guitar, and he wasn't interested in rock and roll anymore. He was sort of a very kind of a nerdy guy. He was
okay.
He's no longer alive, but I loved the way he played. And so we made some demos in LA that provided me with a tape that I could shop around to record companies and managers.
Yep.
So I spent the next 7 years doing that.
Okay. Well,
this was 1969.
Right.
And Ron and I found a house in Laurel Canyon, and it was $175 a month. Little expensive. Little expensive for us.
Wow, can you imagine that today? Oh, what that is today. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Lord,
I don't have
the
to imagine
inflation,
it. I
the
know.
inflation.
Um,
That's outrage.
you
Okay.
know, so,
Anyway.
when they talk about bringing down inflation,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
take that with a great big grain of salt, because inflation never really fully comes down. It
Right.
always
No.
goes up. It's
No.
what's
Yeah, you're right.
important is that the wages go up too.
That's right. And they don't, and they haven't been, and they haven't,
Not
and
as
that's the
much.
problem.
Right.
That's the problem. Yeah. Yeah. Well, your old friend Joni Mitchell was living in Laurel Canyon.
That's right. And thank you. That's a perfect segue into what I was
Yeah.
going to say.
Uh-huh.
I had been shopping my tapes around, and I had been to Elliot Roberts' office. He was Joni Mitchell's manager, also Neil Young's, and other stars of the day. And I called Elliot. What chutzpah I had! I called Elliot's office and asked for Joni Mitchell's phone number, and the girl at the desk gave it to me.
She just gave it.
She gave me Joni Mitchell's home number.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who lived? I said, I'm a neighbor of hers in Laurel Canyon. Blah blah blah.
Yes. Yeah.
And which was true. And
Yeah.
so I called her up, and she said, I said, hey, we met in New York City. We had met in New York City. I had met her at the Tin Angel in the Village before she moved to California. And I said, you remember we went to this rent party together? And she said, oh yeah, come on over. She said, I'm on Lookout Mountain right up. She gave me the directions, and I went over, and she was just the sweetest thing you'd ever imagine. She was nice as pie, and she was not a big star yet. She had just made her first or second album. I think it was the second one, which was the Breakthrough album.
Yeah.
And she played me a bunch of her new songs, and I was in heaven, and I just thought she was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And,
Yeah.
so we sort of became friends. I would drop. She didn't have a car, and I had this beat up old Renault Dauphine. I had a real knack for picking great cars. I used to drive her to the grocery store all the time. The Canyon Country Store was a famous store. The Mamas and Papas immortalized it with when in the song 12:30 that said young girls who come there to the canyon, and in the morning you can see them walking, and there's something about the store with a clock that always said 12:30, and that was the Canyon Country Store. And it's true, the clock never changed.
Never changed.
But so I would take Joni down to the Canyon Country Store and drive her back with her groceries, and I was we were just friends, and she was a wonderful person to be around. And then one day I knocked on her door, and James Taylor opened the door. And I said, Jamie. Nobody called him that anymore. Yeah. So I went, he said, what? Oh. And he was a little bit out of it at the time. And I said, remember me, huh? It's Ted Myers from the Cafe Mosca 4 years ago, Martha's Vineyard Island. Oh, yeah. But he wasn't really friendly. So I said, well, I came to see Joni. Is she here? No, she's not here. Well, tell her I called. Thanks. Good seeing you. Bye. And that was it. Okay. The next time I saw James Taylor, he was a lot more friendly. But I think he was in the throes of a drug problem at the time.
At that time, you think so, yeah. But do you want to tell your version of the song Woodstock?
Why not? Everybody else has one. So yeah, the way that happened was I just dropped in. I was on Lookout Mountain. I had other friends on Lookout Mountain Avenue as well. And on my way down the hill, I just dropped in on Joni. It was like about 10:30 at night.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody does this anymore, but in those days, it was acceptable behavior. And she said, "You can't stay, I'm writing, but listen to this." And she played the first few bars of Woodstock. And I said, I think my words were, I genuflected and backed out of there.
Uh-huh.
I was just like,
Oh,
I said, wow, you know. And then I heard that she wrote Woodstock in a hotel room in New York City while the festival was going on. And she was with David Geffen, and he was managing Crosby, Stills and Nash, and they were playing at the festival, but she didn't want to actually go to the festival. So she stayed in this hotel room in New York City and wrote that song. So that made me scratch my head. So then I saw Graham Nash in a documentary about Laurel Canyon, I think. And he kind of solved the mystery for me. He said, well, she wrote part of the song in that hotel room in New York City. And he didn't finish, but I realized that she finished it at her house in Laurel Canyon.
Laurel Canyon, okay.
And that's what I witnessed. So,
okay. So you were really privy to that, yeah.
Yeah.
You were there at that time, yeah.
I was in the room.
In the room. well, another song, "Going in Circles," a song you co-wrote with Vicky Hutton. Now, was Vicky Danny's wife or
No,
related? They
she
related?
was somebody else's wife.
Okay, all right, all right.
I can talk about this because she is no longer alive.
Okay.
She went by the name Jayananda. She and I were a couple for many years, for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And she was older than I by about maybe 5 years. And she was married to a big time movie director whose name was Hutton also, oddly enough.
Oh,
And so he was making this movie with Elizabeth Taylor called X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
He was in England at the time, which was very convenient for Jai and I. I called her Jai, not Vicky. But she said, well, he really needs a song for the movie. You want to write one? So I said, sure, let's write one. So I wrote the song, and I was thinking about the windmills of your mind, circles, and all this. And I was thinking how bad movie music was at that time.
Yeah.
And how behind the curve they were.
Yes,
in Hollywood compared to the record business. So I intentionally wrote an old style bad movie song. And it turned out to be my only successful song. So it took pretty near a year of us. First of all, she put up the money to go in the studio and make the demo. I used mostly the same players that I had on the original Tree Music demos, and except I had a better drummer, and that's it. Anyway, and so we made a really good demo, and started shopping it around to various artists who we thought might be interested in doing it, with the additional lure of having it be in the movie.
Yes.
So it took like a year, and we didn't get anybody. And meanwhile, the director of the movie got some unknown guy in England to sing it, who didn't sing any better than I did. I don't know why it wasn't. Their version wasn't any better than my demo. So that was going to be the version in the movie, and we were very unhappy. And at the last possible minute, we got a call from Three Dog Night, from their management company. And they said, Danny, we had given it to Danny Hutton. We actually handed it to him, a cassette, because he lived in Laurel Canyon also. In fact, the house I lived in on Lookout Mountain was his ex-house. And anyway, it was all very incestuous. And we knocked on Danny's door at the ungodly hour of 11 o'clock in the morning. He was still in his bathrobe and his eyes were barely open. And we went through a whole spiel about, well, we wrote the song for a movie and it was accepted. It's going to be in the movie, but we don't have a name artist to record it. And it's perfect for you guys. So here's the cassette. A year later, he unearthed the cassette. And the band liked it.
They liked it.
And they called me and I said, for God's sake, hurry. They're in the final stages of post-production on the movie.
Right.
And they've got another version for the end titles or whatever. And they recorded it right away. And they had us come down to the studio and listen to the finished product. And we said, yes. I didn't like it much, but I said, yeah, it's great. And ultimately that was the version that was in the picture, but it was too late to get it on the print of the movie. You know, in those days, everything was hard copy. It was no digital. So it was dubbed onto the master print of the movie that was going to debut in New York City in a day or two. So, and it was impossible to get the revised version to the theater in New York in time. Except Three Dog Night had their own plane. So they took it on their plane to New York. Gave it to the director. He popped it on the projector, and voila.
Voila, I was going to say.
History is made.
It is made. Yeah. That ended up being a B-side to single, didn't it? Yes.
Right. Yeah. And there's a real hair-raising story behind that one too. It was first of all, if you get a song in a Columbia Pictures movie, this is something I didn't know at the time. Columbia Pictures Publishing Company, Screen Gems, automatically got the publishing.
Oh, okay.
And we didn't have anything to say about it.
Right.
But we did get a powerhouse lawyer. The director's attorney happened to be Bruce Raymer, who was also Steven Spielberg's attorney. And Steven Spielberg named the shark in Jaws after Bruce.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
So we had Bruce go in there and negotiate an advance for us, that was like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
So we managed to get a big $1,500 advance from Screen Gems for the publishing of the song. And then meanwhile, the guys in Screen Gems were saying, they were patting themselves on the back saying, whoa, we got a Three Dog Night record. Good for us. I said, you didn't get it. So Three Dog called us and said, well, I said, can it be the A side of your next single? I said, brazenly. They said, no, we have an A side for the next single. That's called Family of Man. And it was written by Jack Conrad, my bass player, incidentally. But we'll make it the B side of the next single. I said, that's wonderful, thank you. But the guys at Screen Gems, there was this guy named, oh God, I mean, these people are all dead now, so I can talk about them. very famous guy in the music industry, the head of Screen Gems. He called me up and he said, it's going to be he said something like, what do you mean it's going to be the B-side? I'm going to call 399. I'm going to say they can't do the song. I said, no, you crazy maniac. What are you talking about? This is millions of records we're talking about, you know, not only the single, but albums.
Right.
So it was, oh God, what was his name? God, I dislike that guy so much. Anyway, I said, so then I called I had Vicky call her husband, the director of the movie, who called the head of Screen Gems, who said, I want that song in the movie and I want it by Three Dog Night. Make it happen. And that's how it happened.
Okay.
So it came out as the B-side of a million-seller single on a multi-million-seller album, Seven Separate Fools, and on another million-seller album, Around the World Live, a live version.
Okay. Well, you know, we didn't mention before on that the third Ultimate Spinach album that Jeff Skunk Baxter played on that, but he had moved out to LA too, and he got in contact with you.
That's right. I ran into Jeff. Jeff was working at Valley Sound, which was the state-of-the-art place to go to get your guitar fixed. And I had acquired an old Gibson Melody Maker guitar. I didn't have an electric guitar at all up to that point. And I asked him, I bought 2 humbucking pickups, and I asked him to convert it from a Melody Maker to a Les Paul Jr. by putting 2 pickups on it. And he said, yeah, hey, how you doing? You know, good to see you and all that. And then he called me about a week later and he said, I'm starting this band with these guys from ABC Dunhill. We're like the studio band for Dunhill Records. And we're looking for a lead singer. Would you like to audition? So I said, I'd like to hear the band. So he said, I've got a recording that we made. So I went over to his house and he played me this song on which, and I'm sure this is the reason he played it. He played pedal steel slide guitar, his new passion. And it was sort of country-ish. And it was called Bye Bye Dallas. You'll appreciate that one. And, and I'll never forget the words, bye bye Dallas, I should have stayed in the palace.
Anyway, yeah.
It didn't make it onto any Steely Dan album.
No album, yeah. We're really proud here. We're really proud of that song, you know, because of the name.
You know it?
Oh yes. Yeah. And my friend who's no longer with us, he turned me on to it. And I don't know how he found out about it, but he had heard it. And he told me too. It was never on any album, but he had recorded it. Maybe it was from a live show. Maybe it was from a live show or something. I can't remember. But anyway, yeah. But people that are in the know around here, you know, it's like they're very proud of that song.
So that's the song he played for me. So I said, well, it just doesn't seem like my kind of thing exactly. So I think I'll pass. And they wound up getting this guy named Dave something or other, who sang lead on most of the first album. And then he was gone. After the first album, he was gone. And Donald Fagen developed his chops enough so that he was no longer terrified of performing live.
Performing live, he was deathly afraid of that in the beginning,
So I was invited to their debut performance, which was at a club called Under the Ice House in Pasadena. And I went out there and heard them, and I thought they had some really good songs. So I said, well, shit, another bad decision on my part. But
Well, see, you could have been the
yeah,
lead singer for Steely Dan. You know, you
but maybe not, because the guy that they hired,
could.
I couldn't. We're both doing it now, but I couldn't tell his voice from Donald Fagen's voice. They say he sounded so similar.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
I wasn't a good fit, really.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It wouldn't have worked out, but yeah.
And not only that, and the point that I made was that, I'm primarily a songwriter. I'm really not that great a singer. So
right. Yeah, but you did keep on writing your songs for several years, but the elusive record company contract just wouldn't come.
until it did.
Yeah.
I signed with another fly-by-night production company that had an ongoing deal with UA Records, also not the greatest record label in the world. And so I started this, I got a bunch of, actually, I got the producers first. I got these two guys who are still friends of mine, Mark Gilliton and Freddie McFinn. Mark passed recently, but I've known them all through the years. And Mark and Freddie and I basically were the producers of the album. And they helped me get a band together, which unfortunately I had to fire the guys I was playing live with. And but I had to listen to their advice, and it was another bad decision on my part, because this guy Dan Seymour was really a great guitar player as well, and could sing and sang harmony with me, and we played a whole bunch of club dates. We played top 40 gigs all over the place.
Yeah.
But they said, nope, he's not good enough to be on the album. So they got me a whole collection of new players, all of whom were on the album. And that's why, if you look at the album cover, I sent you a picture of the backside of the Glider album.
Yes.
I wanted it to be a band. I didn't want it to just be a Ted Myers solo album. For some reason. I just felt having a band is cooler. And I wanted to go on the road. I wanted to go on tour. I wanted the record company to pay for it all.
Yeah.
None of that happened.
No.
So it was, another choice that I made that wasn't the best of choices. And the Glider album came out, and I can't blame anybody else for the production on it, because I had a lot to do with the production on it, and it was a bit overproduced, if I do say so myself. We got the cello player from Electric Light Orchestra.
Oh, yes.
We got all kinds of great players on it. There was a guy from the Mothers. There was Gene Barkin was the lead guitar player. He had been in the Grassroots, of all things. And let's see, who else did I get? Anyway, I got a lot of really good players. And as background singers, I got Scott McCarl, who had been a Raspberry, and and Jeff Stillman, they were working as a duo, similar to what Dan and I were doing in the local club circuit, just playing cover songs. And when I heard them, they sang together so beautifully. I said, would you like to be on an album? And yeah, sure, they got paid. So,
Right.
So that's how that came about. And as soon as the album came out, that was the end of Glider.
Okay. We talk about Incognito.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about Incognito in 1 second.
Okay.
I'll say one last thing about United Artist Records.
Okay.
They essentially buried the record. They didn't promote it at all.
Okay.
And I did some promotion and got it played on a couple of radio stations, but it wasn't enough. you know.
Right, right.
I
You
didn't
got to
have
have
enough.
the label has to be behind you. They really do. Yeah.
And the label was not behind me. And
Yeah.
the label was not behind me because the label was pissed off at the production company. And the production company was fly by night, as I said. And so that's why I say, you know, use very, very prudent judgment when you're signing with somebody. Don't just go with the first person that says yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although it's awfully hard not to.
It's hard when you get so many no's, right? Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
So it was another few years. I played around as a solo artist again with my acoustic guitar, wrote tons of songs, signed another publishing deal, this time with Interworld Music Group. And they actually got one of my songs covered by Seals and Crofts.
Okay.
Who were basically on the tail end of their arc of fame at that time. And then they decided not to release it.
Yeah.
Just
And you never found out why. They didn't say why.
never really found out why. And I never actually talked to them, but I did get access to the Warner Brothers vaults later when I was working for Rhino. And I had them search the entire vault of Warner Brothers, which was the only label that Seals and Crofts was on. And they couldn't find the song.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
So all I know is the publishing company told me they recorded it. Never heard it.
Never heard it. Wow. Wow.
So, you know, you want to hear hard luck stories? I got it.
Talk to Ted. All right. Well, Ted, let's keep in touch.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I appreciate your time, and you, Ted. I appreciate you too. So thank you so much. And again, stay in touch, and all the best to you. You have a good week. Okay.
You too. Talk soon.
All right. God bless.